Why is it that when it comes to tasting whiskey, we follow the mantra of nose, palate, finish? We sniff first, then we have a taste, and then we consider the finish before adding water and repeating. This process has been borrowed from the wine world. Today we're asking, is there a better way for doing things for whiskey specifically? And as we're now in the 21st century, should we re-examine how we taste whiskey and consider, is nose, palate, finish still relevant and still the best approach? My name's Kami from The Sensory Advantage, and today we're going to question the fundamentals of tasting whiskey. So let's examine nose, palate and finish, because this is the accepted approach for tasting whiskey. It has been for as long as people have been tasting whiskey in the modern world, but like I say, this is borrowed from the wine world. Nosing is simply just smelling whiskey. Palate is when you take a sip. We could use the word flavour also, but palate is essentially all of the sensations that happen in the mouth, and finish is of course the residual sensations from the mouth. Now if you want to understand more about how we actually taste, the difference between nosing and palate when we're experiencing whiskey, visit our other video that looks into the science of actually how we nose and how we taste and what's going on physiologically inside the head. I'll pop the link in the comments. So coming back to nose, palate and finish, this is logical, isn't it? It makes sense to smell something, then taste it, and then of course you can't have finish without taste. This is because of the way that our senses were designed. So our nose, when we smell, this is designed to identify things in the external world. It's there to say, is this a danger? Or is this something nutritionally rich that I should therefore eat or drink? That's what the nose does. So it's there to filter out things that are maybe bad for us and says, oh, don't even go near that. You know, when you smell something that makes you rich, that's the whole point. Now when we taste, the palate, this is the second line of defense. This is why our sensitivity for bitter tastes is very developed, because often poisons are bitter. So when we taste something, again, if it tastes disgusting, has a particularly bitter, horrible, rank taste to it, then we naturally reject that thing straight away. So this is the second line of defense. Finish is just a residual palate, but it makes sense, yes? From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. It keeps us safe. We nose. Is it safe to drink? Yes, it is. We taste. Does it taste good? Yes, it does. Okay, we enjoy the finish now. So this is the natural order of things, but we have to consider that drinking a spirit that's 40% pure ethanol or above is not a natural experience. We are not necessarily designed to drink things like whiskey that have so much alcohol in them. So the natural order doesn't necessarily fit. Now, if you watched the previous video we did on how we actually smell and how we taste, you'll understand how the brain actually processes what we nose and what we taste, the palate, in different ways, because the route to the nose is different. Now, if you haven't watched the previous video on how we nose and taste, if you're not familiar with orthonasal olfaction and retronasal olfaction, please check out our previous video. The link is in the description. In there, you'll see the processes of how molecules become aroma on the nose, but also on the palate. Because the majority of what we call palate, or sometimes call it taste, but more accurately flavour, the majority of what happens in the mouth in general is actually aroma still. So check out that video because you'll understand how nosing aroma, and when we have our palate, is also aroma, but the route to the olfactory receptors is slightly different. In essence, when we take a sip, aroma molecules travel from the mouth into the nasal cavity where they're also detected as aromas, and the majority of what we call palate or taste or flavour is in fact aroma. Understanding that, what actually happens here? So as we said, when we nose things, it's examining what's happening in the external world, what's going on around us. It's also understanding things in terms of images, objects, let's call them. So when it comes to smelling, sniffing through the schnozzle, the brain binds together the experience of smelling with visual information as well. So that when I smell a banana, for example, I can not only smell the banana through my nose, but I can also see the banana. It all gets bound together as one bit of information, the visual information of the banana, the object itself, and the associated aromas that go with it. So in essence, there's a direct relationship between what we can smell through the nose and vision, what we can see with the objects. Smell and vision. They're closely related. This is why visual information can skew smell information. So for example, there was a famous wine experiment where they gave wine experts different wines in Bordeaux. They gave them a bunch of red wines and a bunch of white wines. They asked them to assess these red and white wines on different days, in fact, different weeks. One week they did the white wine, one week they did the red wine. And they picked from a list of different flavours and groups of flavours that they could experience in the wines as they went through them. Now for the white wines, they picked out things like apples and gooseberries, green, fresh, the types of flavours that you associate with these white wines. Now for the red wines, they picked out the types of flavours you associate with red wine, dark berry fruits, plums, these sorts of things. But little did they know, actually both wines were the same. Yet they were both the white wine. All they'd done is colour the red wine. So just the visual information changing the colour actually completely changed their experience of what they can smell. So it's easy to understand how vision influences our smell perception of things, because the two are very closely linked, and we live in a very visually dominated world, and we're programmed to look at the world through vision. We don't necessarily look at the world through odours, say like a dog will. A dog will go out in the world and think, what can I smell? We go out into the world and think about, what can I see? So we're not used to prioritising smell over vision. Vision always comes first and will influence smell. Now, how about when it comes to palate, flavour, what people often confuse with taste? Remember, we also smell predominantly when we have flavour, palate, everything that happens in the mouth, molecules travel from the back of the mouth into the nasal cavity. The majority of this is still aroma. But the brain processes this information quite differently to how we nose. Whereas this is all about understanding the external world, this is understanding how pleasurable something is, its pleasantness. And because this is happening in the mouth, it isn't as related to visual information. It's much more abstract. When we sniff something, we're connecting the visual information, I can see a banana, with the smell, I can smell a banana. But when we put the banana in the mouth, what we experience as palate is much more abstract. It's happening inside the head. We can no longer see it. All we can do is feel it as mouthfeel sensations. We can taste it, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, but mostly we can smell it, but we can no longer see it. We no longer have that visual connection with it, so it becomes much more abstract. Hence, when it comes to describing these types of sensations, flavours in the mouth, they become more abstract terms. Whereas when we describe things with the nose, because they're related to vision and objects, they become more about describing objects. I can smell coconut, I can smell vanilla, I can smell honey, all visual things. In the mouth, we may use more abstract terms such as fragrant, floral, spicy, fusty, stale. These types of words that don't necessarily relate to objects, they're more abstract terms. So it's quite a different experience, even though the majority of what we call palate is aroma. They both share the same receptors in the nose. The brain processes the information differently. This is why sometimes when you have a whiskey and you smell it, this is very common with peated whiskies. You know it's peated, but it can be tricky to pick out the peat in there, the smokiness. It doesn't smell particularly smoky. But when you taste it, when you experience its flavour, then all the peat smoke comes back. All that lovely bonfire, beach bonfire, these types of things come back. And this is why, because the brain processes the information differently. Now, it may seem odd that from an evolutionary perspective, we can get more smoke on the palate than on the nose. So you may think that we should experience smoke more on the nose because it signifies danger than on the palate. Why is sometimes smoke more prevalent on the palate? I have ideas about this, but it is an evolutionary conundrum. But the important point is that sometimes it takes tasting something to really become in tune with the flavours, because what you get on the nose is related to vision and objects, and also influenced by those. The colour of the whiskey is influencing how I experience it. Remember the wine experiment where they changed the colour of the wine and the professionals got a different experience just based on the colour alone. It's the same with whiskey. If this was a much darker colour or a much lighter colour, then that would be influencing how I experience the nose. The palate is much more abstract and less related to visual information such as colour. So where am I going with this? Essentially, palate can pick up notes that are not necessarily able to be detected on the nose so easily. Palate is also combining with taste and mouthfeel to create a unique and novel experience. The brain bundles taste, mouthfeel and aroma together to create flavour. So it's an entirely more whole experience. Whereas the nose is literally just smelling. It's purely aroma. So because of this process, nose, palate, finish, what we find is very often people consider the nose very carefully because it's much easier to express aroma in relation to objects, things that we can see, than using abstract terms, because that's how our language is developed to explain the world with vision. This is why we become very nose dominant. Often, therefore, when we move on to palate, people think of a palate in terms of does it reinforce what I experience on the nose, in the sense that the nose is more important than palate. So therefore, we pay less attention to things like mouthfeel, which are so important, especially for whiskey. And we rarely consider that actually most of what we are tasting is in fact aroma. So what we can smell on the nose seems to dominate, but actually this is a greater experience. It's more abstract because it's harder to explain, but we can get a different experience of the molecules in the glass to what's going on here. So my question is, why do we focus on the nose, then the palate? The other interesting point is what we experience on the nose, because it's been influenced by vision, this can then influence palate. It's a two-way process. What we smell influences what we expect to taste. Likewise, what we can taste can feed into what we nose. But then why not just taste? Why not go straight into palate we can avoid the way that we can be influenced by vision and get a more pure experience, even though it's a subjective one, of what's going on in the glass with less influence from vision. Once we've tasted this, it's also helped to get our brain in tune with what's going on. So if there are smoky notes that we didn't detect before, we can get them straight away. And now we're more in tune with the flavour of that whisky. Because we're understanding different nuances of it, we're also understanding things like taste and mouthfeel as well. So when we come to nose after tasting, we're already aligned with a much broader experience. And this can in fact help us to detect different things on the nose with the respect of, say, smokiness. If we've already detected it on the palate, then it's easier to think about it on the nose. So the palate can enhance what happens on the nose. Remember, finish is just the residual palate, the leftover flavours that are in the mouth. As with anything, find your own way. We're all unique people. We all have our own subjective experiences of things like whisky. But experiment. I'm asking the question, what happens when we taste, when we experience the palate before nosing, avoiding the influencing factors from vision and how we can be skewed in our experience. We can get a much more genuine experience of what's going on here, removing some of these external factors, and then we come on to the nose. Why not taste first, experience the palate, and use the nose to substantiate or contradict what we can taste? Well, this nose palate finish can work very well for wine, because often with wine we're trying to understand its development, how youthful it is or how mature it is from the nose. Does the nose change? This is very important. But we have to understand wine is fruit juice. Whisky is a very stable product. It's done its maturation by the time it's been bottled. So when it goes into a bottle, it's not going to change very much at all. Wine is completely different. Wine is designed to develop in the bottle and continue to change. So it's important to understand, actually, when you nose wine, how does it change in the glass? Because it's an indication of the state of the wine and how ready it is to be consumed. But it's completely different to whisky. This doesn't apply. So all I'm asking is, by examining palate first, by tasting first, we can get a completely different experience. It's a more abstract experience and therefore trickier to describe with words, but it's a more overall experience. This experience here can then enhance what's happening on the nose, so when we come to smell it, we can then align the two and be less influenced by vision and external factors. If you like this, if you found it interesting, even if you disagree with it, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But also, if you feel this is valuable information and you'd like to share it with other people, please do so, because this is what it's all about at the Sensory Advantage, is giving people the tools from sensory science to go out there and find their own journey and experience flavour in a new light. If you want to learn more and deepen your understanding, have a look at our website, thesensoryadvantage.com, where you can see our online courses that you can take from the comfort of your own home and really explore the science of flavour and how we nose and taste our favourite drinks. Until next time, keep sniffing, keep sipping, and keep thinking.